She was 16 when she first met him. His name was Daniel. The kind of guy who made people laugh, even when they didn't want to. The kind of guy who didn't take life too seriously, because at that age, who really did? She didn't think much of it at first, just another school hallway crush. But the attention felt nice. She was used to being the one watching from the sidelines, never the center of it. So when he started texting her after class, she didn't hesitate to respond. Their relationship started like every high school romance does. Impulsive, messy, and full of promises that felt real at the time. They'd talk for hours, make plans for the future neither of them really meant, and post pictures like they were the next power couple. Her friends warned her that Daniel wasn't ready for a relationship, but she ignored them. Because in that moment, all she wanted was to be chosen. It went fine for the first few months. Late night calls, shared lunches, secrets whispered behind lockers. But cracks started showing before the year even ended. Daniel didn't always reply. He didn't always seem excited to see her. And whenever she felt that distance, jealousy crept in like a shadow she couldn't control. She wanted him to think about her all the time, the way she thought about him. And when he didn't, she made sure he knew how much that hurt her. By the time junior year rolled around, they were both exhausted. He was pulling away and she was holding tighter. Arguments became routine. Every time he talked to another girl, even casually, she felt her chest tighten with anger. And every time he tried to calm her down, she took it as pity, which only made things worse. Then came the day she didn't expect. The breakup. He told her he couldn't do it anymore. He said it softly, like he was trying not to break something fragile. But to her, it sounded final. Cruel. Like all the time she'd spent caring suddenly didn't matter. She cried, screamed, begged him to reconsider. But he'd already made up his mind. For a week, she couldn't sleep. Every song, every hallway, every friend reminded her of him. And when the sadness faded, it turned into something darker. She couldn't accept that it was over, not when people would see him as the one who left, not when everyone knew her as Daniel's girlfriend. That title had become her identity, and now it was gone. So she did what most broken teenagers do. She tried to get even. She started telling people he'd treated her badly, that he'd moved on fast, that he'd changed. None of it was true, but it made her feel powerful again. She'd walk past him in school with her friends and pretend she didn't see him, though she was always watching. He never reacted, not once. And that silence, that calmness, it drove her insane. Summer came, and she thought she was finally moving on. A boy named Jason started talking to her at a friend's barbecue. He was nice, soft-spoken, funny, and a little awkward. But most importantly, he wasn't Daniel. She didn't really like Jason for who he was. She liked what he represented, proof that she could still be wanted. Soon, they started dating, and almost immediately, she made sure everyone, including Daniel, knew about it. She'd post pictures of Jason, tag mutual friends, laugh extra loud when Daniel was nearby. It wasn't love, it was theater. A performance meant for one audience member. But the truth was, Daniel didn't care. He'd finally found peace. He wasn't posting about her, wasn't talking about her, wasn't doing anything she could twist. And that silence was deafening. She couldn't stand it. By the end of summer, she learned that one of their mutual friends was throwing a big party. Everyone would be there, including Daniel. She saw it as her chance to make one last statement, to show everyone, including him, that she'd won. But there was a problem. She'd already told people she was afraid Daniel might try to fight Jason if they showed up together. It wasn't true, but she used it to get sympathy. She wanted people to see her as the victim, not the villain. When her friends invited her, they hesitated. They knew what she was capable of when emotions got high. Still, she insisted she'd behave. She wanted closure, or at least, that's what she told them. Deep down, she wanted attention. The night of the party, she arrived with Jason on her arm. Daniel was already there, laughing with his friends, looking like the last person on earth who cared she existed. And that killed her. She thought maybe if she could make him jealous, he'd finally react. Maybe then she'd know he still cared. So she played it up, sitting close to Jason, touching his face, whispering things loud enough for others to hear. Whenever Daniel walked by, she'd find an excuse to laugh or kiss Jason in front of him. She could feel her friends watching her, uncomfortable, but she didn't stop. She'd started this act, She had to finish it. But Daniel didn't look. Not once. He was in his own world, talking to people, having fun, like she wasn't even there. As the night went on, more people left. The music got quieter. The air smelled like cheap alcohol and sweat. Jason looked sick. He wasn't a heavy drinker, and she'd been pouring him cup after cup just to loosen him up for her show. She leaned over, trying to kiss him again, but he pulled back slightly. She thought he was being shy. She tried again, and that's when it happened. A wet, guttural sound came from Jason's throat, followed by a splash. Before she could even react, warm vomit filled her mouth and spilled down her chest. Jason's eyes widened in horror as he tried to cover his mouth, but it only made things worse. The pressure sprayed it across her face, her hair, her clothes, the couch, everything. The room went dead silent for a second before erupting into shock and disgust. And across the room, Daniel was laughing. Not in cruelty, but in disbelief, like the universe had done his work for him. She froze. The smell, the sound, the humiliation, it was all too much. Tears streamed down her face as she stumbled toward the bathroom, trying to clean herself while everyone whispered. The night she tried so hard to prove something, she ended up proving everything she'd been trying to deny. Karma doesn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes it's a moment of silence before the laughter, a drink too many, a plan backfiring in the worst possible way. The next morning, Sarah didn't want to leave her room. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to convince herself it hadn't happened, that somehow the memory was just a drunken blur. A nightmare she'd wake up from if she just stayed still long enough. But the messages started coming in before noon. First from friends, then from people she barely even knew. Some pretending to check on her, others just fishing for details. The same people who had once whispered about her relationship with Daniel were now whispering about what happened at the party. It spread faster than she could have imagined. By the end of the week, everyone at school knew. The girl who got puked on, that's what they called her. It didn't matter how many times she tried to change the story, or downplay it, or pretend it wasn't true. The image was burned into everyone's mind. Every hallway she walked through, every cafeteria table she passed, there were snickers, half-hidden laughs, and people muttering her name under their breath. For the first time, she understood what it felt like to be on the other side, the one everyone talked about. She had spent so long trying to make others feel small, craving the power that came with attention. But now that she had it for all the wrong reasons, she wanted nothing more than to disappear. Daniel never said a word about it. He didn't post, didn't laugh publicly, didn't tell his side of the story. He just carried on like it was none of his business. And somehow, that made it worse. Because even when the world was laughing at her, he still refused to give her what she wanted most: his attention. Weeks passed, and her confidence crumbled piece by piece. She stopped hanging out with her usual group, avoided parties, skipped events. Even Jason, the guy she'd been dating, couldn't look her in the eye anymore. He apologized 1,000 times for what happened, swore he didn't mean it, that he was too drunk and sick. She told him it was fine, but deep down, she resented him. Not because he'd embarrassed her, but because she'd used him to hurt someone else, and in the end, she was the one who got hurt. Eventually, they broke up. No fight, no drama, no public scene, just silence. It was the quietest ending she'd ever experienced, and maybe that's why it stayed with her. By senior year, Sarah wasn't the same person she'd been before. She stopped trying to impress everyone. She didn't post about her love life anymore, didn't care about who was dating who. She kept her head down, studied, stayed close to the few friends who didn't abandon her when things went bad. For the first time in a long time, she learned what it meant to just exist without needing to be noticed. And little by little, people stopped talking. New gossip replaced old gossip. Someone else became the subject of whispers and laughter. That's how high school works. Pain gets recycled, names get swapped, and everyone forgets until they're the next target. But she didn't forget. Not because she couldn't, but because she didn't want to. The memory served as a reminder of who she'd been and who she didn't want to become again. Years later, after graduation, she'd occasionally run into some of her old classmates. The conversations were always polite but distant. Some still looked at her with a flicker of recognition, that silent, "oh, you're the one" expression they couldn't quite hide. But she learned to smile through it. She learned to live with the fact that some stories never die completely. They just fade into the background of who we are. It wasn't until college that she really understood what that night had meant. She'd been sitting with a group of new friends, and one of them started talking about a breakup. How ugly it got, how much he wanted to get even. Everyone laughed, shared their own revenge stories, their little victories in love and ego. But Sarah just sat there quietly, staring into her cup. And when someone asked her why she was so quiet, she simply said, "Because sometimes trying to hurt someone just ends up hurting you worse." They didn't get it, not really, but she did. That's the thing about growing up. You realize how small those moments were, and yet how big their consequences became. High school felt like the whole world back then, and she treated every argument like a war. But looking back, it was nothing more than a collection of people trying to figure out who they were, making mistakes in the process. Some mistakes were small. Hers just happened to be messy, loud, and unforgettable. She doesn't hate Daniel anymore. In fact, she's grateful, because he taught her something that no one else could have, that peace doesn't come from proving your worth to others. It comes from not needing to. When she met her husband years later, she didn't tell him the story at first. It wasn't out of shame, she just didn't see the point. But one night, over dinner, he asked her if she'd ever done something she regretted. She laughed softly, stared at the flicker of the candlelight between them, and said, "Yeah. But it taught me everything I needed to know about who I didn't want to be." He smiled, reached across the table, and squeezed her hand. That was enough. If life has a sense of humor, it's a dark one. It doesn't always punish you with pain. Sometimes it just lets you trip over your own pride until you finally understand what humility feels like. Sarah had to fall hard to learn that lesson, but she got back up. And maybe that's the point. So if you ever find yourself trying to make someone jealous or chasing the satisfaction of getting even, stop, take a breath, ask yourself what it'll really change. Because the truth is, revenge doesn't heal heartbreak. It just delays it. People remember moments of kindness far longer than they remember acts of spite. Sarah learned that the hard way. You don't have to. If you've ever gone through something like this, I'd love to hear what you learned from it. Do you believe karma always finds its way back? Or do some people get away untouched? Drop your thoughts in the comments, share your story, and don't forget to support this channel if you enjoy real-life lessons told through true stories. And remember, sometimes the best revenge is just learning to let go.